Hey, inner explorers, and welcome back to Whispers of the Mind. It's an honor to have you here, journeying with me. You're not just watching a video. You're embarking on a deep dive into the human heart, into the very essence of what it means to be alive and connected. I've spent years, decades, plumbing the depths of philosophy, spirituality, and the intricate tapestry of human growth, and I can tell you with absolute certainty, the most profound transformations happen when we dare to look inward, when we allow ourselves to be moved, when we open ourselves to the unexpected. That's what we'll do today. We'll step into a story, not as mere observers, but as active participants in its unfolding wisdom. If you allow yourself, this story will ripple through your life in the days to come. Every lesson, every emotion will become a seed of change within you. To truly receive the full depth of what we're about to explore, I invite you to stay with me till the very end. Let's begin this powerful journey together. Rain poured down on New York City, turning the bustling streets into a sea of umbrellas and reflections on the drenched asphalt. Raindrops hit Alexander Grayson's windshield like little water explosions. But he barely noticed the storm. Focused, he mentally reviewed every detail of his upcoming business presentation. As CEO of one of the city's large financial corporations, his every move was timed to perfection. Emotions were a luxury reserved for moments outside the corporate world, where pragmatism reigned supreme, yet something was about to disrupt his relentless rhythm. That day, stopped at a traffic light, Alexander spotted a figure that didn't blend with the cityscape. On the corner of the sidewalk, a young woman holding a baby in her arms, huddled under the heavy rain, trying to shield the little one with her own body. She wore an old soaked coat, her thin trembling arms wrapped around the baby with a desperate tenderness, barely able to keep him warm. Alexander watched her in his rearview mirror, feeling something stir within him, a distant, unsettling sensation he wasn't used to letting in. Before diving into this story, I'd like to ask for your support. Please subscribe to the channel. We're close to reaching my dream of 1,000 subscribers, and every new member is crucial to continue bringing you stories that touch and inspire your day. Thank you for your support. The millionaire's gaze was drawn to the expression on the young woman's face. Even from a distance, he could see a mix of exhaustion and determination in her eyes. She held a small cardboard sign with uneven letters that read, "Please help, we need food and shelter." For a brief moment, he remembered his own childhood, marked by scarcity and cold streets, before he built his empire. But he quickly pushed the thought aside, focusing on the traffic light that was about to turn green. However, just before the car moved, Alexander felt an irresistible surge of empathy, something he'd learned to control over the years. He lowered the car window. Momentarily speechless, the young woman hesitated, approaching, and he noticed she could barely hold the baby. The rain intensified, heavy drops running down her face, blending with silent tears. Alexander almost automatically gestured for her to come closer, and in an impulse that even surprised himself, opened the car door. "Get in," he said, his voice firm but gentle. The woman hesitated, clearly suspicious, but the need to protect the baby won out. She settled into the back seat, carefully holding her child as Alexander quickly pulled away from the curb. He adjusted the car heater, feeling the chill, and noticed how her body seemed to tremble despite her attempts to hide it. Their eyes met briefly in the rearview mirror, and he saw deep exhaustion in her features. Despite her hardships, there was a certain dignity about her, a resilient pride that kept her from asking for more than necessary. Alexander was intrigued, and without knowing why, decided not to go straight to the airport. Instead, he drove toward his mansion, a property that rarely hosted any trace of human warmth. "What's your name?" he asked, softening his tone to avoid startling her grace. She replied faintly, "And this is Lucy," she added, glancing at her daughter with a faint but protective smile. Alexander nodded, not asking more. The silence between them was almost comfortable despite the unusual situation, the grandeur of the car, the warmth now filling it, and the momentary safety offered by that unexpected act of kindness felt surreal to Grace. Alexander knew that something about Grace touched a part of his past, but he chose to ignore the discomfort, focusing instead on the practical decision he was about to make. Minutes later, the car parked in front of Alexander's vast mansion, a modern building with glass windows and a sprawling, well-kept garden. Looked at the house wide-eyed, unable to believe what she was seeing. She stayed silent, not knowing what to expect as Alexander exited the car, moving to open the back door and help her out. "You can stay here until I get back," he said, handing her a silver key, still in disbelief over his own decision. Grace held the key with trembling hands, almost unable to believe what had just happened. She was used to looks of contempt and rejection, never expecting anyone to be capable of such a sudden act of compassion, especially from a man like Alexander, whose appearance and demeanor suggested someone cold and detached from the struggles of the streets. "Sir, I don't know how to thank you," she murmured, her voice choked with emotion and accumulated exhaustion. "No need to thank me," he replied, avoiding eye contact, slightly uncomfortable with this rare show of humanity. "Just take care of her and yourself. I'll be back tomorrow." Without waiting for more explanations, Alexander turned and walked back to his car, not looking back. He knew he had a flight to catch and a meeting that could determine the future of his company. But as he drove toward the airport, an unsettling feeling continued to haunt him. He knew Grace wasn't just another homeless person. He had helped. Something about her touched him deeply, though he was reluctant to admit why. Grace, for her part, entered the mansion silently, still in shock. The warmth of the house enveloped her, and she took a deep breath, inhaling the soft fragrance in the air. The luxury around her seemed a world apart, a distant reality, and the mansion grew more imposing with every step she took. Holding Lucy close, she slowly walked through the spacious living room, where sophisticated furniture, art pieces, and a crystal chandelier made everything seem like a mirage. To Grace, this was an unexpected and almost miraculous refuge, a place where she could finally rest, if only for one night. As the night went on, Grace found a comfortable room where she could lay Lucy down on a soft bed, something she'd never been able to offer her daughter. Lucy's eyes sparkled upon seeing the luxurious room, and Grace couldn't hold back an emotional smile. For a few moments, she felt genuine happiness, seeing her daughter in a safe environment, even if she didn't know what the future held. That night, while the storm continued raging outside, Grace allowed herself a moment of relief. Alexander's house was an improbable shelter, but for now it was all she had and all she needed. Closing the door behind her, Grace felt years of torment and uncertainty lift from her shoulders, as if she'd left them outside. The pristine walls, the luxurious furniture, and the tall windows overlooking the dark, rain-lit garden made this place a surreal haven in silence. As if afraid to wake from a dream, Grace let her gaze wander around the wide room, almost unable to believe what she was seeing. In her arms, Lucy slept, unaware of where she was, but nestled in her mother's arms, as if, for the first time, she felt safe. Grace knew this chance, as improbable as it was a small miracle for someone like her who lived without a permanent address or stable shelter. Knowing she could sleep without worry was an unthinkable luxury. Looking around, she noticed an open kitchen fully equipped with gleaming appliances. Feeling a pang of hesitation, she approached, but hunger overpowered any reservations. Since she'd lost her home, the chances for a decent meal were rare, and cooking with fresh ingredients even rarer. Without thinking too much, she gently laid Lucy down on one of the sofas, making sure she was still deeply asleep, and walked to the kitchen. The cabinets around her were impeccably organized, revealing shelves filled with foods she hadn't seen in a long time. She opened the refrigerator drawer with eager fingers, finding fruits, vegetables, and dairy products all fresh and inviting. Under the white light, she took out some ingredients, hesitant as if each movement might shatter the magic of the moment. She chose eggs, a few vegetables, and a slip of homemade bread, feeling a simple joy as she began to prepare a meal. As she stirred the eggs in the skillet, Grace couldn't contain the swelling emotion in her chest. Cooking for most was routine, but for her it meant stability, security, and above all, a sense of control that had long been missing. When the soft scent of the cooked eggs began to fill the kitchen, a quiet smile appeared on her face. It was a familiar, yet long-forgotten feeling. She cut small pieces for Lucy, imagining her daughter's reaction to a meal prepared with love and care in a few minutes. The simple but nourishing meal was ready, and Grace sat at the table, her heart warm and her gaze showing relief and gratitude in her tired eyes. Lucy woke up to the smell, and Grace lifted her with a tenderness that transcended hunger and exhaustion. The child smiled, her eyes shining with the innocence of someone unaware of life's hardships. Grace patiently fed her, quietly laughing at Lucy's delighted expression with each bite. It was a common scene for many, but for Grace, it was like a stolen piece of normalcy from the past. As they ate, Grace allowed herself to relax. For the first time in months, each bite brought strength back to her body and soul. The simple meal became a banquet, a moment of peace amidst the storm that was her life. After dinner, Grace turned to Lucy, who was playing with a spoon as if it were the most precious of toys. Grace watched her with a serene gaze, savoring the instant of peace. She got up and wandered around the house, looking for a place where she could give Lucy a warm bath and maybe take one herself. Entering the master bathroom, Grace stopped, astonished by the space's grandeur: white marble walls, heated floors, and a bathtub large enough for two gleamed under the soft lights. It was a place she never thought she'd be, a symbol of a world she didn't belong to, but there, facing the chance to provide a bit of comfort for her daughter. Grace took a deep breath and decided that at least for one night she'd enjoy this comfort. She filled the tub with warm water and carefully undressed Lucy, gently lowering her into the water. Watching her daughter's face light up with surprise at the soothing warmth, the little one laughed and splashed, her laughter echoing around the bathroom, transforming the space into a bubble of genuine happiness. Grace washed her daughter's little fingers, her face, and wrapped her in a soft robe she found in the closet. After taking care of Lucy, Grace finally took a bath herself. The warm water washed over her skin, carrying away the traces of time and the painful memories of nights spent in the cold. Closing her eyes, she was transported to a time when she still had a home and a bright future. But life, with its unpredictable turns, had pushed her far from that path, teaching her that destiny wasn't always fair. Grace stepped out of the bath feeling renewed, as if she'd left a part of her pain in the water flowing down the drain. She found a soft robe and wrapped herself in it, feeling embraced, almost as if in a dream. Lucy, already sleepy, rested peacefully on the king-size bed, pillows a rare and precious sight that made Grace sigh with pure relief. She lay beside her daughter, holding her gently, her mind drifting between gratitude and hope. With Lucy snuggled in her arms, the accumulated exhaustion of recent months washed over her in waves. Grace closed her eyes, breathing in the gentle scent of clean sheets and the warmth of the room that protected her from the storm outside. She knew this night was a precious gift, and she wasn't sure what the next day would bring. But at that moment, she was determined to set aside her fears and anxieties. For the first time in a long time, Grace let herself fall asleep without worry. It was a strange but welcome peace that enveloped her completely. The shadows of her past seemed to dissolve, even if only temporarily, as she took a deep breath and sank into a deep and restorative sleep. During the night, images of her old life appeared in her dreams. There was a time when she was young and full of plans, when nothing seemed impossible. She remembered the days she was a dedicated student, hoping to make a difference and build a future. But those dreams had been abruptly interrupted, and she had to learn to survive. Grace shifted in bed, but as she held her daughter tighter, the comfort of the present enveloped her in a way that, for the first time in a long time, she didn't have nightmares. Instead, she dreamed of a life where she could offer Lucy a childhood free of hardships. As the first rays of sunlight began to light up the room, Grace slowed, woke up. Still between sleep and reality, the room remained silent, except for the soft sound of Lucy's breathing beside her. She looked at her daughter's serene face and allowed herself a smile. That night had been more than just rest. It was proof that hope still existed in her life. Grace got up, breathing deeply, determined to do whatever it took to keep that peace in her life and her daughter's. When the first rays of sun entered the room, Grace's eyes opened slowly, and the reality around her began to solidify. The soft bed she had rested on, the blanket that warmed her, and Lucy's serene face beside her reminded her that even if just for a moment, she had found a safe haven. But as her gaze wandered around the elegant surroundings, her thoughts began to drift back, and painfully, her past returned, like a turbulent river of memories. Grace never imagined she would one day be homeless. Years before, she had been a young woman full of dreams and strength. Her dreams had seemed so close, almost tangible. She had worked hard to get accepted into one of New York's top medical schools, overcoming challenges and fighting tirelessly to become the first in her family to earn a college degree. She was recognized among her professors as a talented student with a passion for medicine that showed in her dedication to her studies and her sincere desire to help others. Her mother used to say that even as a child, Grace was always caring for small animals in the neighborhood, always kind, always trying to ease any suffering. Everything seemed to be in place until the day she lost her parents in a tragic accident. Grace remembered the late-night phone call, the hollow feeling upon hearing the news, and the despair of realizing that the life she knew was ending. The world she had known crumbled in seconds with her parents' deaths. She lost not only her family, but also the emotional support that kept her grounded. The grief consumed her, and the pain, once internal and silent, turned into a weight that affected her every action, draining her spirit. Along with her parents, Grace also lost the financial support that allowed her to study without worrying about expenses. Bills began piling up, and the exhausting pace of medical school, combined with the job she'd taken to try to support herself, began to take a toll on her performance. She spent sleepless nights torn between academic obligations and rising hardships, and it became clear her energy was dwindling. It was during this time of vulnerability that she met Christopher, a charming and seemingly understanding man. Christopher was gentle and engaging and seemed able to read her soul. He became a friend during difficult days, someone who made her believe she could overcome that phase, and that perhaps it was still possible to smile sincerely. Grace entered the relationship, finding in Christopher what she thought was support and eternal love. She trusted him completely, allowing him into every detail of her life, sharing her fears, dreams, and vulnerabilities. But over time, Christopher revealed a side she never could have imagined. The sweet and caring man became possessive and aggressive. Grace, who once found security in him, now felt trapped in a web of control and manipulation. The once affectionate gestures turned into cruel words and demands, and she realized too late that she had handed him control of her life. Quietly, he started emptying the account she'd kept for emergencies. Secretly, he diverted small amounts, but by the time Grace noticed, it was too late. All her remaining savings had disappeared. One evening, as Grace tried to confront Christopher, he showed her the full extent of his selfishness and coldness. With harsh, indifferent words, he laughed at her illusions, dismissing the feelings he once claimed to value. He said he'd never wanted anything but her money, enjoying watching her depend on him emotionally. Then, as if she were nothing, he left her without a trace of guilt. That night, Grace was left alone, penniless, carrying in her womb the child she hadn't even had a chance to plan for. Without financial or emotional support, and with the burden of pregnancy, Grace found herself unable to continue her studies. She tried to find work, tried to start over somehow, but with every attempt she faced people's contempt and the harsh reality of not being able to support herself. New York City, once the backdrop of her dreams, had now become a battleground where each day was a struggle for survival. As she caressed Lucy's face, her tear-filled eyes reflected the pain and strength that had kept her going. Her daughter was her only treasure. For her, Grace endured cold nights, extreme exhaustion, and constant insecurity. Every night spent on the streets, every threat she faced was a burden she bore silently. For Lucy's sake, Grace never let despair dim her eyes when she looked at her daughter. She always tried to smile, hiding the tears and the growing fear inside her. It was her silent promise her daughter wouldn't bear the weight of her suffering. And now, in this mansion, safe and warm, a deep gratitude began to well up within her. The memory of everything she had been through intensified the generosity of Alexander's gesture. He knew nothing of her story, yet he extended a hand, not just any hand, but one of hope, a chance to breathe before facing life's difficulties again. Grace wondered how she could thank him, but found no words. How could she express such gratitude? It wasn't just the physical protection he offered, it was a reprieve from suffering, a night where she and her daughter could sleep in peace. Grace closed her eyes for a moment, searching for some way to repay him. Her mind filled with images of her first night in college, of happy days with her parents, of the love she once felt before life took such a different turn from what she had planned. And she decided right then that she wouldn't let this act of kindness fade away. Alexander had given her something no amount of money could buy, proof that kindness still existed in the world. She was determined to honor that. Somehow in that moment, Grace decided she would start over, no matter how she had faced the greatest obstacles already. And now, with Lucy in her arms and a renewed will in her heart, she knew she had to turn gratitude into action. She knew Alexander might never understand the depth of her thankfulness, but she promised herself that she would do everything possible to show him that his gesture had been more than just help. He had given her a night of peace, and that peace gave her the strength to keep fighting. Alexander returned to the mansion earlier than expected, as his meeting had been postponed at the last minute. Entering his home, he sensed an unusual warmth. He stopped in the hallway and heard what sounded like a soft laugh, and to his surprise realized it was a baby's laughter. Curious, he followed the sound to the guest room corridor, where the slightly open door revealed a scene he'd never expected to see in his own house. The room, bathed in afternoon light, was filled with a warm and peaceful atmosphere. Grace, kneeling on the floor, was playing with Lucy, making a stuffed bear dance from side to side. The little one tried to grab the toy, laughing each time Grace moved it just out of reach. Grace's expression radiated genuine affection and joy, something Alexander recognized as rare in his own life. He stood there for a few seconds, silently observing, completely captivated by the simplicity and happiness that emanated from the two of them. Grace and Lucy's presence seemed to have transformed the house, filling it with a warmth Alexander had never experienced before. Without realizing it, a gentle smile appeared on his face, and he felt something missing in his life, a sense of coziness and humanity he'd never imagined wanting. Suddenly, Grace sensed his presence and turned around, slightly surprised and embarrassed. She quickly put the bear down and held Lucy, who was still smiling, unaware of Alexander's presence. For a moment, Grace seemed to hesitate, as if afraid of reproach for being so at ease. "No need to stop on my account," Alexander said gently, his voice surprisingly soft, almost encouraging. Grace relaxed slightly, but her eyes showed a mixture of surprise and gratitude that Alexander couldn't ignore. He realized how much that simple offer of shelter meant to her. There was deep sincerity in her expression, and he could see that the safety and comfort of his house meant more to her than he'd imagined. I didn't know you'd be back so soon," Grace said, her voice slightly trembling, but filled with dignity. Alexander took a few steps closer, looking at Lucy with curiosity. The child looked at him with innocent eyes, reaching out her little hand, and on impulse, he extended his finger for her to hold. Lucy's touch was soft, and she grasped Alexander's finger happily, making him smile in a way he hadn't expected. The simple gesture seemed to contain a sweetness and simplicity that touched him deeply and unexpectedly. "She's amazing," Alexander murmured, looking at Grace, who now smiled with pride and emotion. "Yes, she is," Grace replied, her eyes shining with a feeling that went beyond words. Holding Lucy closer, she continued in a whisper, "And I don't know how to thank you. Having a safe night, a roof after so long, it was like a dream." Alexander felt the impact of Grace's words and realized how much that night had meant to her. Each of her words made him feel a growing sense of responsibility, something he couldn't ignore. Grace wasn't just a stranger he'd helped. She and Lucy had filled an invisible void in his life. The simple scene, with laughter and genuine smiles, brought a new energy to the house and inexplicably to his heart. "Grace," Alexander said, his voice lower but full of sincerity, "there's no need to thank me. Actually, I think I need this as much as you do." Grace looked at him, surprised and moved by the unexpected confession. It was unimaginable to her that a man like Alexander, so powerful and resourceful, would admit to needing something, let alone her and her daughter. But there before her, he seemed more human, even vulnerable, as if that admission were a surrender to his own emotions. And suddenly Grace realized he also carried a silent loneliness. Even so, I'm grateful, she murmured softly, her voice filled with emotion. This place, this chance, means so much more than I can express. After so many hardships, it's more than I could ever ask for. Holding Lucy close, Grace felt relief flowing through every part of her body.